In this video, I will show that God is in charge, that He is in charge of world events. And I will prove that by showing you the plan that's been coming from thousands of years ago that's being fulfilled by God. Now, to explain this better, I will first explain to you what happens at a building site and how the plan of a building site evolves. If you're at the gate and somebody arrives and tell you that at 10:30 a truck will arrive with bricks and 12 o'clock a truck will arrive with sand, and then exactly as planned, as predicted, 10:30 a truck arrive with bricks and you send him to the correct place, and 12 o'clock a truck arrive with sand and you send him to the right place. Now, you might think that there was a prophecy because it predicted what would happen in the future. And a messenger came and gave you that information and told you what to do. But you would not see that there's a plan behind it. And if you go to the site of the project manager, you will see this plan. And this plan says that there will be a residential construction that will run from May to December. And it will tell you when the foundation will be laid. And that foundation will take 42 days to lay. And all the different steps and all the details. And that plan is used to then order the stuff and order the trucks. And the project manager tell the truck to arrive on that day. And then he sends a message to the person at the gate and tell him the truck will arrive. So that message to the guy at the gate becomes an instruction from the project manager, and things happen exactly as the project manager predicted. And then 10:30 the truck arrived with the bricks, not because something magic happened. It arrives because that was the plan of the project manager in control. So God is the project manager in control of the world. And He sets this plan. And this plan you can see right in Genesis 12 that God says, "And unto thy seed I will give this land." And then as you move forward, you see that Israel returns to the land that was promised by God. And because God is in control, that is their land. And nobody can do anything about that. So let's dig a bit deeper into this plan of God and how it unfolds. The Shemitah, also known as the sabbatical year, is a year of rest mandated by the Jewish law for the land of Israel. Every 7th year is a year of rest. So on the 6th year you must get enough food and you must save that food, and God will provide enough food for the 7th year. And on the 7th year you must not plant, you eat the food from the previous year. And then you rest and the land rests. And then every 7 Shemitahs, the year after, is a Jubilee year. And God's instruction is that land must go back to its rightful owner. So God has got this drumbeat that goes boom, 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 boom. And then you've got a Shemitah year and boom, 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 boom. And you've got a Jubilee year. And that is the drumbeat of God's plan. And through the years, He's followed that drumbeat. And now we will go through a few Jubilee years and show you how it happens exactly as planned. A lot of information comes from this book, The Oracle, by Jonathan Cahn. If you want more information, I suggest you go and get this book and read it. But he breaks it down in very much detail for us. So if you look at the Ottoman occupation that happened from 1517, and then you follow 6 drum beats, 6 50-year cycles, and then you come back to the Ottomans and they are bankrupt. And then on that Jubilee 1867, there was a call for Israel to return because the time of the Ottoman occupation was over. And we see in World War I, the end of the Ottoman, with the Balfour Declaration 50 years later. So there was the Ottoman occupation, and for 6 cycles, they controlled the land, and the land was completely desolate. And then the Ottomans were bankrupt, and 50 years later, the Ottomans' empire completely ceased to exist. And with the Balfour Declaration in 1917, the land was given back to Israel. And then 50 years later, Israel takes Jerusalem, 1967. And 50 years later, in 2017, President Trump formally recognized Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. And here we've got a map of the Ottoman Empire and how it expanded. And it reached its peak, and then God said, okay, your time's over, and the Ottoman Empire got wiped off the face of the earth. And Jerusalem went back to its rightful owner, the Jews. On this Gantt chart, you can now see the cycles. So you can see in the small indicators on top, 50-year cycle, you can see the Ottoman occupation, the time it lasted, and then how there was a battle, and how with the Crimean War, Ottomans lost and they were close to bankrupt, and then they had to sell their land to pay back their debt. And with the Ottoman Land Code, it was agreed that the land can be sold, so the Jews bought the land. And when they realized it's only Jews, they started to try and stop the Jews, but then the Jews came with companies and carried on buying the land. So when World War I came and the Ottoman Empire ceased to exist, the land was already owned by the Jews. And then the land was given back to the Jews in the time that followed. Part of what happened in the return of Israel was that the land had to be measured. If the land wasn't measured, how can it be sold? So Charles Warren was sent to measure the land. And then he came to Jerusalem and he surveyed the map of Jerusalem. Mark Twain arrived and they actually shared the same hotel at the same time. But he came from America. And Mark Twain wrote The Innocents Abroad. That book sold 70,000 copies in 1869. And that copies was sold to a lot of Jews. And the Jews read it and they said, but this is our land and it's desolate. We must return. And God used that book to start the movement to return to Jerusalem. And then there was a book written by Theodor Herzl, and it was The State of the Jews. He wrote it in German. And he sent that pamphlet out everywhere to start calling the Jews back to Jerusalem. And on the 50-year cycle in 1917, the Balfour Declaration was issued by the Parliament in Great Britain, and that said that they will not prevent Jews from returning to Israel. And with that, the Jews started returning to the land that they already bought. And then at that point, the land was still desolate, and they started building the land back. And in the 6-day war, Israel took Jerusalem. So let's look at Charles Warren. The prediction, so where God said this is going to happen, was in Zechariah 2 verse 1. And he said there, and behold, a man with a measuring line in his hand. And then said I, whither goest thou? And he said unto me, to measure Jerusalem, to see what is the breadth thereof, and what is the length thereof. So God said he's going to come. And then he came and he measured the land. And he was paid to measure the land by the fund that was created. And then Charles Warren was sent as the surveyor to measure that land. And he started digging in Jerusalem because the walls wasn't even visible. So he had to dig to find the walls. So he measured, but he also started excavations. And if you read that full chapter, it was explained there that they asked him what walls, and there wasn't anything visible to measure, but he came and he measured it. Now, Mark Twain came from America to also visit Jerusalem, but he came as a journalist, and he was sent to return different articles for a newspaper. And he wrote the article, and then 2 years later, he wrote a book, The Innocents Abroad. And that was the book that was then sold. So let's look at that. Mark Twain came from America on the steamship, but it was written in Deuteronomy 29 verse 22. A stranger shall come from a faraway land. And he came, and as he was in Jerusalem. The appointed scripture for that day was Deuteronomy 29 verse 22. So it says, a stranger shall come from a faraway land. He then continued to explain how the land is desolate and how nothing grows there. And you can read the rest of that passage of how the land was just not fit for people to live. Theodore Herzl was born in 1860. When he was 12 years old, he had a dream. And in the dream, God told him to declare to the Jews that I will come soon. He then started pursuing that dream. And in 1897, he organized the first Zionist Congress. And he wrote, I founded the Jewish state. Perhaps in 50 years, everybody will know it. And then Kristallnacht happened in 1938, and the Nazis started killing Jews. And 7 years later, Franklin Roosevelt died, and in the UN Palestine Partition Plan in 1947, they declared Israel. They had the plan for Israel, and on the Jubilee Congress of the Zionists in 1947, 50 years after, he stated that maybe in 50 years everybody will know it. That was the year when Israel was ready to be declared a state. And then Israel became a nation in 1947. The Balfour Declaration of 1917, we will have a look at that just now. It was simply a short letter in which it was declared that His Majesty's government will favour the establishment in Palestine of a national home for the Jewish people and would use their best endeavours to facilitate the achievement of this objective. Let's look at a small portion of the overall plan. Israel was scattered from the year 70, shortly after Jesus, and they only returned in the 1900s. Mark Twain wrote a book. That book was already in Deuteronomy 29 verse 22. It says, a stranger will come from a far land. Charles Warren had to measure the land. In Zechariah, it was said, a man with a measuring line will come. In Isaiah 31 verse 5, it says, like flying birds, so will the Lord of hosts protect Jerusalem. In the First World War, it was planes for the first time, and they protected Jerusalem. Amos said that they will rebuild as in the days of old, and that was thousands of years before it actually happens. The Ottoman occupation happened, and even though it was 300 years, more than 300 years, it's a small blip in the total plan, and God destroyed that empire totally. Israel started buying back land, and in Jeremiah 32 verse 44 he says, man shall buy fields for money. And he started healing the land. Isaiah 32 verse 4 says, neither shall thy land any more be termed desolate. Nobody will say that that land that Mark Twain described as desolate is still desolate. The land has been healed. Deliverance of Jerusalem was in Isaiah 33. Thine eyes shall see Jerusalem, a quiet habitation. And it became a quiet habitation, and people returned. Israel gets their land back in Genesis 12-17. Unto thy seed will I give this land, and God gave that land back to them. The British came, and the British was a great world empire. And then shortly after the declaration of Jerusalem, of Israel, they started turning on Israel. And that great empire is a shadow of its former self. And the more they resist Israel, the more they start crumbling. Jewish immigration started, and then the 6-day war, and Israel took back Jerusalem. God declared the end from the beginning, and he did that so that we can know that the Lord God is in charge. In Ezekiel 20 verse 42 he says, and ye shall know that I am the Lord.